Agatha Christie is arguably the most popular author in the world. She's sold more than 2 billion books, and even though she's no longer alive, people are still buying her books. And I would argue that no other author has ever managed to capture a reader base like Agatha. The question you might be asking is, how on earth can a long dead writer still be getting readers addicted to her books when most authors are struggling to shift books to their family members? After analysing a lot of Agatha's writing, she uses a secret formula. It's the same formula in every one of her novels. And there are some storytelling techniques as well that she uses to make her novels so addicting. The first thing I'm going to do is talk about this formula and then dive into the tactics and how you can apply them in your writing. First up, as I mentioned, let's start with the formula that Agatha uses in all of her writing. So even though every one of Agatha's stories are different, she uses the exact same formula in every single one. It's a structure that she uses specifically to keep readers addicted. At the core of every Agatha Christie novel, you will find a dead body, a detective who is either discovering the murder or being called to solve the murder, and a limited number of suspects, meaning that the murderer is among them. As the story unfolds, Agatha will throw in a series of red herrings, and this is one of the key techniques she uses to keep readers engaged, and I'll talk more about this later. The formula you'll notice next is the detective then begins questioning every subject, and he investigates the crime scene, and then he will carefully uncover clues, allowing the reader to also attempt to solve the mystery themselves. But just as the reader thinks that, of course, they've figured it out, Agatha Christie is then going to mislead you. And she'll either introduce a shocking twist, or she might even kill off a main suspect, which of course will leave the reader shocked and confused, which then gets you more addicted because you have to know who the real culprit is. The person you just thought it was has potentially been murdered. And in the final 20 to 30 pages, this is where the detective really gathers all the remaining suspects together in one place, and of course the truth is revealed. And you'll find that pretty much every one of her novels follows this structure. But of course, this formula all by itself isn't enough to make her book so addictive. It's the storytelling techniques that keep the readers hooked. So let's talk more about those. Now, the first technique you will have heard about, which is foreshadowing. And if you haven't, I'll be surprised. But the way that Agatha uses it is very clever. So let's take an example. How would you like to spend your last days here? Oh, no thanks. I think the weekend will be enough, right? So there's an example of foreshadowing, because we know either the weekend's not going to be enough or it will be their last few days. And so you can use direct foreshadowing, which is where the story gives a clear hint about what is going to happen next, or indirect foreshadowing. These are clues, symbols, or events that will hint at something, like a dark storm brewing, often in books means that, it's not about the storm, it's about something else. And Agatha uses foreshadowing to prepare readers for an upcoming twist. So an example from one of her most successful novels of all time, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, she said, "I'm not going to pretend that at the moment I foresaw the events of the next few weeks. I emphatically did not. But my instinct told me that there were stirring times ahead." From the very start, this makes the reader curious, right? What's going to happen? What are these events that she's talking about? And I'll give you another example, which comes from And Then There Were None, which has sold 100 million copies. Incredible. An elderly man warns a character, "Watch and pray," he says. "Watch and pray. The day of judgment is at hand. I'm talking to you, young man. The day of judgment is very close at hand." The character, of course, in the book dismisses this warning, but then later realizes he was completely wrong. And this is an example of direct foreshadowing. It makes you as the reader certain something bad is going to happen. And of course, foreshadowing alone isn't what makes Christie's books so addictive. So now let's talk about another one of her famous storytelling techniques. This technique is the red herring, and I love this technique from Agatha because it's not used enough. You don't really see other people using it, and you definitely never hear people talking about this. A red herring is, of course, a false clue. It's something that is designed to seem important, but ultimately it misleads the reader. And this technique keeps the reader engaged because they're trying to figure out what is a real clue, what's misleading. An example, imagine a detective story where a bloody knife is found in a drawer. The police, of course, believe it's the murder weapon. Later, it turns out the knife was never actually used in a crime. It was just a distraction. This has wasted the reader's time, and it forces them to rethink everything. You get that frustrating feeling of, oh no, I was completely wrong. And then that gets you more addicted because you have to figure out what was actually important, what you should have been paying attention to. Some other examples are an innocent character who looks guilty because maybe they're at the crime scene, or a character with a very strong motive but they didn't actually commit the crime, or the real murderer, appears completely innocent. There's no clear motive, no weapon or opportunity, and it's not until later in the story we find out what the motive actually was. And Christie was a master of this technique. She would introduce several guilty-looking characters, reveal at the end that none of them had actually committed the crime. So why are these red herrings so effective? Well, they increase tension. When readers find a clue, they immediately start building theories around the clue. The emotional roller coaster of believing, I've got it, I know who the murderer is, and then they get proven wrong, keeps them hooked because they have to keep going. And this brings us to the next storytelling technique, which is streamlining the plot. Whenever you read an Agatha Christie book, you will notice that her books speed up towards the end. And this is very important when we talk about pacing. She placed more descriptive passages at the beginning. And then as the book progresses, her writing becomes shorter, sharper, and much faster. The story is then moved forward through more rapid dialogue. For example, in her novel Halloween Party, she uses minimal description and quick dialogue, which is an incredible way to build suspense. I saw a murder once, said Joyce. Don't be silly, Joyce, said Miss Whittaker, the school teacher. I did, said Joyce. Did you really? Asked Kathy, gazing at Joyce with wide eyes. Really and truly see a murder? Of course she didn't, said Mrs. Drake. Don't say silly things, Joyce. I did see a murder, said Joyce. I did. Notice here how Christie only uses the word said instead of fancy dialogue tags like replied or exclaimed, because in this exchange, where everything is short and sharp, it's moving really fast. And her whole belief system when writing was keep it simple. Keep straightforward language which allows readers to focus on the mystery rather than the writing style or constantly getting their dictionary out to figure out what that word meant. The next technique that goes unnoticed and unobserved is that she sets her stories in isolated locations. An island, for example, a boat, or a train in the classic Murder on the Orient Express. Well, why does she do this? The reason is it forces the characters to interact a lot. And when someone is hiding a secret, that's going to increase tension. It's also going to create a lot of urgency because, of course, the murderer is clearly among them on the train or on the island. And this heightens suspense because really there's no escape. So there's the risk someone else is going to get murdered. For example, in Murder on the Orient Express, a snowstorm traps everyone inside the train. No one can leave, which also means no help is coming. And to raise the tension even more, the murderer is still among them. And so this makes the reader feel trapped, right? You feel trapped just like the characters. And then if another murder occurs, well, the stakes will rise even higher. Next up, the rule of fair play, which is one of my favorites. And what Agatha does so well is that the reader and the detective are equals. The reader receives the same clues at the same time as the detective. Nothing is hidden, and if you pay close attention, then you can solve the mystery yourself. And that's why her books feel so satisfying. They're not just stories. Another way to think about her writing is it's a game that you play, a mystery game. How did Agatha write such mind-blowing mysteries? Well, she started every novel with 5 questions, and they are: who did it? Why did they do it? When did the murder occur? how did it happen, and where did it happen. She also very cleverly uses double plots. So you have your main plot, which is the murder investigation, and then you have a subplot, which is a psychological trickster who is misleading everyone. And this keeps things really exciting, as there's always something happening. So I hope you enjoyed this video and you took a lot away on these amazing writing techniques that come from Agatha. Leave a comment down below with your favorite and any of them that were a big surprise to you, or any that you plan to use in your future writing. And now YouTube will be recommending another value-packed video of mine for you right here. So go ahead and take a look at that one next.